Hi there, and welcome back to probably our last episode of this semester. We are your hosts. I am Mr. Daryl.
I'm Miss Samantha, and today we'll be discussing Macbeth by William Shakespeare.
And this will be for grades 10, 11, and 12.
Let's begin.
First on the agenda will be a look at the vocabulary, and then we will have a look at the author, and then a summary of the play.
After that, we'll get into the characters, setting, and one main theme. Of course, we will conclude by reviewing what we learned and giving you our final homework assignment.
Ooh, I've enjoyed those.
Me too. Now, our first vocabulary word for the day is ambition. Ambition is a strong desire and determination to achieve success.
Our next word is to foretell. It's a verb, and it means to predict the future.
And when you foretell something, you create a prophecy. A prophecy is a prediction of what will happen in the future.
If you get a lot of prophecies correct, they might accuse you of being supernatural. Our next word. This is when something's unnatural or magical in origin, something beyond scientific understanding.
Our next word is enemy. And an enemy is a person who is actively opposed to or hostile towards someone.
And if an enemy is there, you might end up being ruthless to him. That is, having or showing no pity or compassion for others. Synonyms of ruthless are merciless, cruel, and heartless.
But hopefully, if you do act ruthlessly, you will eventually feel guilt, our next word. Because guilt is the negative feeling of having committed a wrongdoing.
You might also feel guilt if you give in to our next word, temptation. That is something that attracts someone to do something wrong or unwise.
Now keep all of these words in mind throughout our lesson and for when you read Macbeth yourself. Now, it would be impossible to talk about Macbeth without first talking about our author of the day.
And he is really one of the greatest. William Shakespeare of England, a small town called Stratford-upon-Avon. He was born in the 16th century and he dies about the early 17th century, 1616. Now, everyone knows him, of course. He was an English poet, playwright, actor, widely regarded as the greatest writer in English and maybe any language, possibly. He wrote nearly 40 plays, which have been translated into almost every single language on earth.
Wow, truly incredible. And now let's dive a bit more into the background of Macbeth. Now, Macbeth was first staged in 1606, about 10 years before Shakespeare died. And it is the shortest of the Shakespearean tragedies. And these Shakespearean tragedies focused on human suffering. In Macbeth, we have both psychological and physical suffering, so it's doubly tragic. And that's not even where the tragedy ends. It's not just in the text. But unlucky events have happened in the real world to theaters and actors that have performed Macbeth. So now there is a superstition to never say the name Macbeth in a theater because it's bad luck. So many actors refer to Macbeth as the Scottish play.
Ooh, Samantha, I wonder, does that apply to TV studios as well?
Oh, I certainly hope it doesn't, Daryl. Fingers crossed, because we are going to say the name Macbeth a lot today.
Indeed.
But let's test our luck now with a summary of the Scottish play.
Let's start. Following a battle with enemy forces, Macbeth, who is one of King Duncan's top military generals, meets 3 witches. The witches foretell that Macbeth will eventually become the King of Scotland.
Macbeth is skeptical at first and uncertain what to expect. He plans to visit King Duncan that night. He writes ahead to his wife, Lady Macbeth, telling her about the witch's prophecy.
Lady Macbeth is ruthlessly ambitious. She wants her husband to become the king, no matter the cost to others. When Macbeth arrives at the castle, she persuades him to kill King Duncan.
Now, Macbeth has doubts about his wife's plan, but he still decides to follow it. So that night, while King Duncan is asleep, Macbeth stabs him.
When Duncan's death is discovered the next morning, Macbeth becomes the king. But to ensure that he remains in power, Macbeth and his wife agree that he must murder more people, which he does.
Macbeth becomes a ruthless tyrant who will stop at nothing to remain king, even murdering entire families. This, of course, causes fear and anger in his kingdom, and he creates many enemies.
His enemies include a man named Macduff, whose life was destroyed by Macbeth's cruel ambitions. Macduff creates an army and prepares for battle with Macbeth's soldiers.
Lady Macbeth, meanwhile, has nightmares where she sees bloodstains on her hands that just won't wash off. She is full of guilt and is driven mad by what she and her husband have done. Before Macbeth's enemies arrive, Macbeth receives news that his wife has killed herself, causing Macbeth to sink into depression.
Still, Macbeth awaits Macduff's army, feeling confident because he believes the witch's prophecy, which means that he can't lose in battle.
However, he realizes that he misunderstood the witch's words and that he is not guaranteed to win the battle and he is not guaranteed to be king forever.
And with this, Macduff finally kills Macbeth, and King Duncan's son becomes the King of Scotland.
Wow, that is just a tragedy from start to finish. And it really wouldn't be so tragic without our characters. So let's look at them now.
Indeed. Let's look at Macbeth now, obviously the title character of our play. He's a brave and capable warrior. He has consuming ambition, but he doubts himself, and that's key. It's not until the witches foretell his success that he acts on his ambitions, becoming a tyrant and a ruthless murderer. I think Shakespeare uses Macbeth to show the terrible effects of ambition and guilt on a person who doesn't have strong character to begin with.
That absolutely makes sense. Now, let's move on to Lady Macbeth, of course, Macbeth's wife. She is one of Shakespeare's most famous and frightening female characters. She's stronger, more ruthless, and more ambitious than her husband at the start of the play, which is a real role reversal, since at this time, it was men who were seen as having these traits, not women. Over time, though, Lady Macbeth begins a slow slide into madness, and she's really affected by her guilt. So here, Shakespeare shows how unnatural it is for people, especially women, to commit such wicked acts.
Let's move on to the character Macduff now. He's in many ways the opposite of Macbeth, the moral opposite of the force. At the beginning of the play, Macduff is loyal, brave, just like Macbeth. Both are on the side of King Duncan, but that's where it splits. Once Macbeth understands that Macduff will not be loyal to him, Macduff becomes the target of Macbeth's anger, guilt, and vengeance, his desire to protect his own power. Now, Macduff, on the other hand, is deeply motivated by his son's and wife's death, and speaks several times in the play about how he has to avenge them against Macbeth.
And now let's take a look at our last characters of the day, the three witches. Now these are the ones who foretell Macbeth's rise to becoming king with their prophecy. They symbolize dark thoughts and evil temptations. what they say, it's not written in stone, but they give Macbeth the idea of overthrowing the king, which he accepts due to his weakness of character. The three witches are clearly the most dangerous characters in the play. They're tremendously powerful and utterly wicked. They manipulate human society with their supernatural powers, and they're really not limited by the human world. In fact, they're outside of human society, which makes them unpredictable and even more dangerous. Oh, some interesting characters here, and dark too, which brings us now to our dark setting.
Indeed, let's look at the setting. I'll look at the when first. Now, this play is set in the 11th century, the medieval period, and it deals with Scotland, the northernmost region of what we now call United Kingdom. And at the time the play is set, Scotland is a separate country, which explains the battles between the English and the Scottish. And they were just trying to figure out who would rule the area.
So definitely that power struggle already at this time. Now that brings us to the where of Scotland. Because it was so far north, Scotland is often dark, dreary, and damp with very little sunlight, which of course makes it the perfect setting for a play about secrecy, deception, and evil deeds done under the cover of darkness. And that brings us perfectly now to our main themes.
Now, there are many themes in this play, of course, but we decided to focus on one for today. And that is gender and its relationship to power. And we'd have to focus on Lady Macbeth for this. Her husband, at one point, Macbeth, implies that she is a masculine soul inside a female body just because of the way she plots and is so ambitious. And so Macbeth, the character, seems to be linking power with masculinity by that association. Shakespeare, however, seems to use her and the witches, so the female characters, to suggest the opposite idea to this Macbeth's words, and that men should be the ones that do everything when it comes to power.
And we really see that these clever women use feminine methods of achieving power. That is, through their words, through manipulation, rather than physical strength and physical violence. And they use these methods to further their supposedly male ambitions. So women, the play implies, can be as ambitious, they can be as cruel as men, but it's society that just doesn't give them the ability to pursue their own ambitions on their own. Now, there are so many more incredible themes to discover, but we just don't have time, so you'll have to find them out on your own. Now, let's review what we discussed today. First, we talked about the famous William Shakespeare. Then we moved on to our summary, a look at our characters, and the setting, the dark setting of Scotland in the 11th century, before finally talking about the theme of gender and power.
Now would be a good time to go over the vocabulary of today. Here are the words once more. Ambition, to foretell, prophecy, supernatural, enemy, ruthless, guilt, and temptation.
Now that brings us to the homework for the day. We've loved reading your submissions, and even though summer is just around the corner, be sure to answer this one last question we have for you all.
And here it is. Do you think the three witches created Macbeth's desire to become king, or do you think he always secretly had that ambition? And you should explain your answer.
Be sure to submit your answers to us at englishbookeducation.co.uk/homework. Thank you all so much for joining us. not only during this lesson, but also throughout this entire semester. I know Daryl and I have loved getting to rediscover some of our favorite books and favorite plays with all of you.
One thing I'd like to add, we hope that this love of reading was communicated to you and that you continue to read, not just this summer, but in future years, your whole life. There's a lot of books with a lot of themes and a lot of things to think about.
Absolutely. So be sure to also check out bookshop.ge for all of your summer and future reading needs. Now, once again, thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful summer, and we'll see you all again next academic year. Bye, everyone.
Have a great summer.